in the work that we are doing. With all your help, we will win this campaign. You are not just here to listen to me. You want to hear from the Member of Parliament for Tapnew, one of the Canada's most dynamic young politicians. Without further ado, I give you Justin Trudeau.
Wonderful introduction. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. Thank you mostly for your work, for your support of Pam, for the fight that we are all leading right now to take our Canada back. Yeah. What we have right now is a government that is picking and choosing who it wants to support, picking and choosing who it caters to. That's not Canadian. Any government that's making choices about who it chooses to represent isn't understanding that the strength of this country is not in spite of differences, but because of those differences. And the only way we make a strong country is by pulling together those differences. As I look through this crowd and happily say hello, bonjour, sat sri akal, namaste, on an identity based on history or religion or ethnicity or language or culture even, but on values. Our identity is based on a respect for each other, a compassion, an openness, a generosity, a willingness to work hard, and a desire to be there for each other as well in tough times. It's a knowledge that in this country we have to, from time to time, lean on each other to make it work. And that capacity to live and to thrive and to survive in a country where, whether you arrived here 400 years ago or just 40 days ago, we deal with winters that are too big, spaces that are too winters that are too cold, spaces that are too wide, and we need to reach out and build strong communities that look beyond our visible differences and bind ourselves on all of our common dreams, our hopes for our children, for our grandchildren, our hopes to build a stronger, fairer, truer society that opens itself up to the world to be a model for this world. Because you know what? Canada's been coasting for a few years. I'll admit, we've had things pretty good. Our economy was solid through this recession. Solid, of course, because the Liberals resisted what Stephen Harper wanted to do to our banking system, and therefore, now that he's taken great into the world, despite his protestations, we have an economy that managed to slay the deficit through the 90s so he could take office with a $13 billion surplus, which he spent even before the recession hit in the fall of 2008. The mismanagement these guys have come to embody is absolutely ridiculous. And that is articulated very clearly in the mistaken priorities in this election. They want to continue corporate tax cuts for the richest 5% of our companies in Canada. Not our small businesses, not our medium-sized businesses, but the 5% of the biggest, richest companies. He wants to reduce their taxes further by $6 billion. Now, the Liberal Party is the party that started reducing taxes for corporations. We got our tax rates to internationally competitive levels. We're better than most countries. And we did it at a time when we were in surplus, when the economy was going well. Now, he wants to continue those in times when the economy is not going well, when we're in a record deficit. And we say, you know what? Sure, we'd like to continue those corporate tax cuts, and we will, once we balance the books that you've made. But for now, those $6 billion are needed in the hands of hard-working Canadian families. That's what the Liberal platform is all about. The fact that the government thinks it could get away with giving $6 billion to its friends in big business. Get away with promising $30 billion to its friends in the aerospace and military industrial complex in the States. $30 billion for fighter jets that are way too fancy, way too expensive, way too much for Canada, or tens of billions of dollars on mega prisons, even though crime is declining in Canada. How do they get away with decisions like this that make no sense according to Canadian values? Well, they do it by creating cynicism about our democracy, by making people believe less in the capacity of government to function, by demonstrating general levels of incompetence in government that is cleverly hidden to make people say, oh, government is useless. Government is useless anyway. So whether we pick the red team or the blue team or the orange team, it's all going to be the same. Well, you know what? That's not true. Their level of contempt for Parliament, and therefore contempt for Canadians. Their contempt for anyone who dares stand up and say, maybe you guys are making a mistake on this. The independent officers of Parliament, the accountability officers, all the people they've chosen to marginalize because they were pointing out pesky facts that were getting in the way of their ideology, have been brushed aside, and our democracy is weaker because of it. So people across the country are saying, you know, why are you liberals keep talking about our democracy? The question is the economy, and the economy is strong. Why are you talking about our democracy? Well, our economy can only be strong if we're taking care of our democracy.
Yes.
And the only way to take care of our democracy is to respect our democracy and the institutions that it embodies. Mr. Harper has failed that basic test of what it is to be Canadian. You know, you ever think of the American motto of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Well, Canadians is much more mundane. Peace, order, and good government. Well, you know what? Stephen Harper has forgotten the good government part. And that's what the Liberal Party is all about. But before we can even convince people to look at our platform and look at the strong, smart decisions we're making that will help families in the short term, but also build a stronger country over the medium and long term, before we can demonstrate to Canadians that this is the plan we need to move forward with, we have to do something that's going to be a little bit harder. We have to remind Canadians that governments should be in the business of setting a vision for this country, of saying where we need to go, of saying this is the future we want to build for our kids and our grandchildren. People are beginning to accept that governments, you know, unless they're giving me 13 cents back on the toaster that I buy, they're no good for anything because they just get in our way. But governments have a role of helping our communities function, helping our families get ahead, helping our businesses survive in a strong framework that keeps them cutting edge in accordance to the world's markets. There is a role for this country that goes beyond just us getting by and coasting. The entire world needs to figure out the trick that Canada has gotten so well. That trick of getting along with our differences. Understanding that the strengths of this country are in all the varieties, all the perspectives, all the realities that come together with common ideals and common goals in this country. Every place in the world is struggling with conflicts relating to different identities and, you know, what you are and where you're from and who you believe in and all those things. Canada can and must be one of those solutions the world turns to. But we can only do it if we're not busy being divided amongst ourselves. If we're not busy being turned one against the other for electoral gains. Mr. Harper is ramping up fears and concerns between refugees and immigrants. He's saying to immigrants, those refugees coming over on boats are trying to cut ahead of you in line. They're the reason. These boats showing up off Vancouver Island are the reason you're waiting 13 years for your parents to come over. No, the reason you're waiting 13 years for your parents to come over is because every single year Jason Kenney has been Minister of Immigration, he has cut the numbers of parents and grandparents sponsored to come over. Every single year. And when you oppose immigrants and refugees, play up fears, play up insecurities, call refugees queue jumpers. Queue jumpers. There is no queue for refugees. There is a process. We evaluate someone on whether or not they are fleeing persecution, torture, and death that their home country cannot or chooses not to protect them from. They have no country to protect them, no place to call their own. They have no country. And Canada, as a signatory to the UN Convention on Refugees, says Canada will be your home. And it's happened in generations past to extraordinary effect. Every wave of refugees coming. And the one that always comes to mind on personal levels is, of course, our Ismaili community, who've come over and worked so hard and built such that comes over works harder because we're given this opportunity and this chance to build a future for ourselves and to become Canadians. At any time we start turning against that process and saying, oh, you're just getting in the way of the legitimate immigrants, which is a lie, you're hardening Canadians' hearts. Hardening Canadians' hearts at a time where we need to be opening them up. Where we need to be understanding that we are extraordinarily lucky. To be here in this country makes us luckier than 99.5% of the planet that isn't here in Canada. But with that luck comes responsibility. I know a little bit about being lucky. So I know a little bit about the responsibility to offer, to give back, to serve that goes with that. And we have to start stepping up as a country. We have to start believing that we can and must be more. We need to know that this is our time. The 21st century is going to be a time where the planet needs Canada, where countries around the world will turn to our model. Because if the 20th century was the century in which the struggle was to recognize everyone's inalienable rights, the 21st century must be the century in which we win the fight to recognize every single person's inalienable value. That everyone has something to offer, their community, their family, their world. And our capacity to give opportunities to everyone to contribute to that level will be the hallmark of our success, not just as a country, but as a species through the 21st century. So right now, as we lead up to these last 2 weeks to a very important decision time for Canadians, we have to think long and hard about the kind of country we want to build, the kind of Canada we want to leave to our children, the kind of world we want our grandchildren growing up in. Do we want to keep supporting conservatives who base their entire identity on protecting people from the worst within us and among us? Or do we want to choose a liberal vision, which is all about bringing out the very best within and among us? That is the choice we're having to make. That is the choice that here in Fleetwood Port Kells leads to picking Pam Danois. And that is the kind of